Morning. Today's tale from the Hoodie is my Saipan hoodie. I know what you're thinking. Where's Saipan? Well, what's Saipan? Well, those of you who don't know, and it's actually quite shocking that so many people don't know, Saipan is an island, one of 15 islands in a chain known as the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands in the Pacific, nearest to the island of Guam. Guam is actually also in the chain, but it's distinctly separate because Guam is a U.S. territory in the Pacific, and Saipan and the Northern Islands, the Northern Mariana Islands, are Commonwealth. Still U.S., much like the U.S. Virgin Islands, the U.S. Puerto Rico, but little known because it's so remote, but it shouldn't be. It should be very well known. You know, it's U.S. Commonwealth, everybody's a U.S. citizen. Sadly, in Commonwealths, they don't have a right to vote for American politics. They do vote, of course, in their own Commonwealth. But Saipan is one of the most idyllic tropical paradises in the Pacific. It's about 12 miles long, if I remember. And it's about 4 miles wide, then it widens out to about 9 miles wide. Kind of shaped almost like a dinosaur, they say. But it's, you know, it's a fairly small island. But of course, when you live there, it gets bigger. So much so that if you live on one end of the island, and if the other end is only 12 miles away, you're like, man, I ain't going out there. But for me, I spent a good part of my adult life out there working. That's where I met my wife. And I did so many things out there. It was awesome. And it's a central place in the Pacific where you can travel, you know, to other different islands, to Palau. I'm sure maybe you've heard of that. And certainly the common route was to the Philippines. And the plane routes are common to Korea and Japan. If you haven't heard of Saipan or the Northern Mariana Islands, sometimes it's called the NMI. You might see that in literature, or you'll see the CNMI for Commonwealth, Northern Mariana Islands, or just Google Saipan, S-A-I-P-A-N, and it's a slice of paradise, man. One of the more significant islands in the 15 island chain of the Northern Mariana Islands is Saipan's neighboring island of Tinian. For those of you war buffs, if you know much about the history of the war in the Pacific, Tinian is the island where the bombs, the A-bombs, were dropped on Japan, ending the World War II. And all of the islands around there are just littered with war remnants. I mean, you know, post-war, there's probably some books on that, but post-war, yeah, the war effort, they did, you know, go clean up a bunch of everything they blew up out there and all the different islands. But they also left things. They left tanks in the lagoon, or maybe like a Japanese Zero bomber or something, or a U.S. landing ship. They'll leave things in the lagoons because they become these kind of memorials almost, but more significantly, I think they become, you know, part of the economy later, because obviously everybody loves to go to a tropical island, and they go, what do? You go diving, right? Scuba diving, big tourism draw to dive in that kind of blue water, and go diving in on one of the pieces of history in the Pacific is just amazing. And so yeah, I went there, I think I first came there in 96 6, and found myself a little shack kind of in the jungle. Actually, some guy owned these 4 little kind of shacks, and when I say shack, it was really cement. I mean, it was kind of a, I think he built it himself, just the cement walls and stuff, and then it had a bedroom on either end, and just kind of a big kitchen area in the middle. But it had a backyard kind of thing where I could just plant stuff in the jungle and stuff like that. And I had already been to Thailand before. I'd been all over before I got that job in '96. And I wound up realizing that Saipan, it had a very unique, well, I don't know, basically a unique contribution to the U.S. economy. I don't even know if unique's the right word. Anyway, Saipan at one point was home to probably the largest importer of garments into the U.S. garment industry. That's right. All your Louis Vuitton, and, Tommy Hilfiger, you name it, Liz Claiborne, you name it. If it's expensive clothing, it was being made on Saipan. There were probably 20, 30, probably even more factories on this tiny little island where they could buy up land for 55-year leases from foreign companies, mostly Chinese, some Korean. And they'd make a factory, and they would make all these clothes that we wear. And the reason they would do that is because it avoided tariffs. You did not have to pay tax if you could put "Made in USA" on the label of your clothing. If it said "Made in China," you're going to pay for that. So previously, everything that was made in China, considerable amount of money. If it's $100 million, then you're going to pay whatever, 30 or 40 of that on tariff, probably, I think it is. But it was insane. It was insane. There was plenty of money around, and garment industry was thriving. Build up everything. Started building up everything. It was just, and they needed workers, of course. And you don't have a ton of local workers on an island. So they brought in massive amounts of Chinese workers and Thai workers, and Korean workers, anybody they could get, really, but mostly Chinese, I think, and a huge Thai community of workers. That's actually where I met my wife. She was working in one of the factories, sewing, and I'd have like parties at my house in the jungle, and because I could speak a little Thai at that point, I met some Thai people like in a grocery store or something like that, and some of the guys drink beers and go up to the house and on the weekends, and so I had a truck, and I'd go pick them up at the factory when they had a day off, and go back to my house in the jungle, and barbecue and drink beers, kind of Thai style. It was awesome. One day I met my wife there. She came to a party at the house, and we hung out. And too funny a story was that back in the day, that was when internet was just kind of blowing up a little bit, maybe, and people were making web pages and stuff, and I made a web page about my wife and I, how we met. It was, again, almost 25 years ago now. So, but I think we had been out not many times, once or twice or something. And I would ride my mountain bike around the island, and to work and then back home into the jungle. And so one day outside the factory, because I'd passed the factory on the way back home, and I'd stop maybe at the liquor store across from the factory, sit down, maybe have a beer or something with the guys. Anyway, at this time, my soon-to-be wife was outside with me, and we're just yeah. And then I asked her if she wanted to come home or come to my house with me, which would be the first time we're coming to my house alone, right? And she was like, yeah, sure. And so I was gonna ride home, get the truck or whatever, and come back. She's like, no, I just go on the bike. And I'm like, well, I did have a bike rack, metal rack on the back, and she could sit side saddle on that. So I was like, oh, well, all right. So she hopped on side saddle, and I took off down the road. And at the end of the road, along the beach, it kind of curved and went up a hill. And but hills weren't a problem for me. So I busted up the hill with her, and as soon as we got on the straightaway, a little bit of a downhill, this dog came running out was chasing us, and my wife attempted, I can't remember now exactly if I said, don't or something, but she tried to kick the dog away, like, get away, kicked away. And when she did that, she, threw the whole body weight thing off on my bike, and I wound up high-siding the bike, crashing. And she went flying face first into the pavement and put her hands out. She didn't hit her face, but both of her hands were, full of rocks and bloody gravel or whatever. And then, of course, chased the dog away or whatever. And I was like, oh, dude, oh, man, I'm so sorry. She's, I go, I'll take you back, to the factory. She's like, no, it's okay. I'm like, are you sure? And she's like, yeah, no, it's okay. So, all right. So then, and then I think it started raining, or it had been raining. And then, so I'm cruising down there's a bit of a downhill, approaching an intersection. And the intersection is flooded to where it's like right over the curb. I mean, there was only, I think only one or two curbs in this intersection anyway, but the water was flooded over the intersection. And I had to through the intersection, and of course, I didn't have fenders on my bike or whatever. So, I think it was raining actually, and so we both did, we're soaking wet from plowing through the water, just roostering back there where she's sitting. And to boot, I wind up hitting the curb on the other side. Bam! And that just, she's sitting, side saddle on a metal rack, and it just, bam, nailed her and sent her flying up in the air. And I'm not sure if I crashed, but I do know that I had to stop because she could barely function. She could barely walk or whatever. And so I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. She's like, no, it's okay. And so I'll take you back. And she's like, no, it's okay. So I took my shirt off. It was soaking wet anyway, but I took my shirt off and I folded it up and just made this wet pad on the bike rack with it, so she could at least have a little bit of comfort. So she sat on that, and I trudged. It's another, it wasn't short. I mean, but it was a couple miles probably. So I had to go all the way down, then went up another hill, and I go around a little bit of another hill, and I have to go down this rocky dirt road into where I live. And this, mind you, again, this is the first time I'm going to bring this girl home to my house. And by then, we were soaking wet. She was bleeding from the hands, and oh man. And so we got in the house, and I said, okay, well, I got her some clothes and a towel and stuff, and let her take a shower. And then I took a shower, and I had two bedrooms, one on either end. And I can't remember. I think we ate something or whatever, but it was a nightmare getting there, whatever. So I let her sleep in that room, and I slept in this room. And then in the morning, I actually took her back in the truck. So, but that was our first meeting. It was crazy. I figured, well, probably not gonna get a second date on that one. But it turned out she must have loved me because, we got married. But yeah, anyway, Google Saipan if you haven't, and beautiful place. If you ever get a chance, go there. You know, they have a few hotels. I mean, most islands in the Pacific, you know, struggle with their economy, especially if it's based on tourism. You do have a lot of typhoons. This already have an 8-month-long typhoon season, but you know, just like most hurricanes and typhoons, I mean, you know the difference, right, between a typhoon and a hurricane. It's geography, not, you know, weather vectors or whatever. You know, typically in the Pacific you're going to call it a typhoon, and in the Atlantic you're going to call it a hurricane. But you know, on a small island, very small, so it kind of just passes right over, right? Just like the eye of a hurricane, you know, you halfway through it passes your city, it's all calm, and then you get the back end of it and it moves out. But Saipan, it's a glorious place. This hoodie is actually from Saipan Southern High School, home of the manta rays. Manta, 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 ray, ray, ray. And I spent probably, 15, 17 years in the Marianas before I moved out. I did have a couple contracts, but outside the Marianas. But my wife actually also opened a store there. It's called Hip Hop Islands. We sold all that stuff. Yeah. But that was a lot of fun. It was a good time. I think it was, I guess you could probably call it my formative adult years. And I learned a lot. The people, just amazing. The students, schools on Saipan, amazing. You know, I mean, the quality and caliber of teachers just far surpassed most every school I think I've ever, school system that I've ever worked with, even in the U.S. Just crazy. And, but yeah, beautiful place, beautiful slice of paradise. I've pretty much always chased the sun in my career work, islands, you know, in particular. You know, before I finished college, I mean, during my spring break and summer break and winter break from college, I would, you know, I'd save up my money that I was getting from my state grants and stuff like that from college, even probably student loans. But I'd save money, and I'd do odd jobs too that, I don't know, under the table maybe, so that when these breaks came, I could take off. And I'd go, most of the time I'd go to the Caribbean because it was easy, and my mom at the time lived in Florida. So I'd go to the Bahamas, I'd go to the Cayman Islands, or Jamaica, Aruba. I'd go to these places and just, you know, chill and do my thing. Some of the summers I would go to Europe, but I think I went to Europe every year. But you know, I'd go out to the Balearic Islands, specifically to Menorca, which is a neighboring island to Mallorca. Mallorca is a big one, but Menorca is another island that you may not have heard of. But you should definitely go there because it's awesome, very awesome. And yeah, and so when the opportunity had come up to get a job in Saipan, I was like, yeah. I think my first job out of college was on an island, which was actually Guam. So I worked on Guam in the Pacific in 89 or something, 90, I don't remember. But I worked on Guam, and I think I had been to Saipan like for a weekend or something from Guam. And then, or Rota, or one of the other islands. And then, so I knew about it, and I happened to be in San Diego, I think at a windsurfing event, and there was a big job recruitment fair going on at the hotel, and I happened to see someone that I knew in there, and and they were, usually in these recruiting events, they have these meet and greets in the beginning, like the first evening, everybody comes in, have little cocktails, and everybody walks around, hi, my name is Bob, and blah, blah, blah. And I have been talking to the two ladies, and they were recruiting for Saipan. And I was like, oh, yeah, Guam, Saipan, oh, yeah, I remember, blah. And so later, as we mingled around, whatever, they were trying to like recruit a teacher or something like that. And so they're like, oh, Craig, come here. And they go, hey, because at that time I didn't think about going to work or whatever. And they said, hey, can you tell these people about Saipan? Tell them about you've been there. Tell them about Saipan. I go, oh man, it was awesome. You gotta be there. You gotta be crazy not to go there. Blah, blah, blah. And so they're like, so they recruited, and then I don't know how it evolved over those few days from the recruitment, but I decided I'd go. I thought, international teaching, I would, it's better to do you have 2-year contracts, but it's better to do like maybe a 3-year. Do 3 years, 3 to 5 years if you want good stability on your resume or something. But it's common that that international teaching would be a 2-year contract. A lot of teachers and their families go somewhere 2 years, move on, go another place 2 years, move on. And it kind of works out. It works out for the school, and it works out for the teacher. Teachers get to travel, and at the school, if you weren't that good of a teacher, you should, hey, your contract's finished. But fortunately, I think I was always, perceived anyway as a good teacher. Later to be a good administrator. But yeah, Saipan, I felt really like it was my home. It gave me a sense of, family. Met so many great people. I'd call my brothers, my sisters. I haven't been there now since, I don't know, since about 10 years, I guess. I think I left there last time in 2013. 2013? 2011? I don't know. But yeah, so if you haven't been to Saipan, Google it, look at some of the war history. And actually on that note, Saipan is probably going to be the basis for what is probably going to be my first published book. So it's a book I've been finishing for probably 10 years, if not longer, made for a movie. And it's got all the tales of kind of the adventures now that I had been in through the characters, but a lot of the history. We call that what is it called? The kind of writing is historical fiction. That's what it is. So it's got these elements of history that are factual, but yet it's fictional character and plot, and it's pretty cool. Hopefully I can get a break here on the farm and wrap it up and get it out. It'll probably be as an ebook, just easier that way. But yeah, so my tale from the hoodie. Hope you liked it. I like this hoodie. Definitely probably one of my favorites. And hope you enjoyed that story. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you on the next tale.